I took the product school course maybe in the spring of last year. The inaugural course, and it was super insightful. I'd been at Microsoft for a long time. I've been there for 7 years now. It's always good to get some outside perspective, so it's cool to see some PMs. So I started Microsoft around the time when we were transitioning from on-premises server-based products to the cloud. I feel like a dinosaur. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, this idea of like, what does it mean to transition, in different large companies to something new and something different. And different cultures, different companies have different ways of looking at that. So we're going to look at the macro level, then we're going to look at the medium in between macro and micro, and then I'll talk a little bit about my experience. So the in between would be Microsoft specifically. So before I get started, a little bit about me. I like the Sounders. I'm married, father of one, maybe. Everything I say here doesn't represent my wife. She's a therapist. She says, "Don't embarrass me." The Sounders, or even my dog, or Microsoft. This actually got out, and they're like, "Oh, what are you saying at the place?" And so my manager's like, "Make sure you say that." And so there we go. So I want to start off just talking about why do companies change. We're going to go over, there's a ton of them, right? I found a lot of websites around like, there's 16 different change processes, different impetuses for change. But I just want to focus really quickly on the three big ones. And it's always the Goldilocks scenario where one is too big, one is too small, and one is just right. So we'll start off with moonshots. I told my wife I was going to be talking about moonshots, and she said, what? She had no idea. Moonshots actually come from the term, like, trying to get to the moon. Does that surprise anybody? Like, that's what it's actually about. We don't actually go to the moon, by the way. Like now we're working on it, but when tech companies talk about it, we look at Google's X, company X, or self-driving cars, internet.org, connection. They're trying to connect the entire planet and the whole world. Microsoft's, we're using AI to cure cancer. The big idea here is, like, if you're trying to change a company or trying to get them to do something, what's a huge goal that we can go towards? So something similar to what JFK was talking about. Let's get to the moon. Let's all rally behind something that we're super excited about. And that's a positive thing. Everybody's like, yes, I want a car that drives me. I want to connect to the internet while I'm in the African safari for some reason, or curing cancer. Those are all really great things. So I think when we think about change, you can think about it in a positive or a negative sense. And you can think about these big ideas. And sometimes when you're working in a large organization, you get to just see other parts of the organization doing amazing things. Like, I'm not curing cancer. I'm not working, but I get to say that I'm part of that. So that's one organizational way of getting some inertia. The second one is burning platforms. And have you guys ever heard this analogy before? Burning platforms? So I work at Microsoft, and we bought a little phone company called Nokia. I don't know. and Stephen Elop was in charge of, he was the CEO of Nokia at the time, and he sent out this infamous email to the whole company saying, like, we're at a burning platform moment. And essentially, imagine you're on, out in the ocean, and you're on an oil rig, and it's on fire, and the fire's bad, the water's cold, the water's not as bad as the fire. I'm going to jump, and that's essentially it's the opposite of a moonshot, but it's the same impetus. It's things have gotten so bad that you have to do something. You have to do something drastic, and you have to do it now. And sometimes when you're in a startup, it feels that way. Things are always burning platform moments. If you live in Seattle, you know a ton of people who have startups, or you worked in a startup yourself. And I have a friend who has 5 different startups inside of one. There's like 6 of them, and there's like 5 companies in that one group of friends. They make what we call the meat nest. And the meat nest was essentially the Internet of Things for barbecuing before it was big. We called it the meat nest. It calls it the Loki, and it did a Kickstarter and all that. And he also did something with guitar products. We worked with Fender to create something. He worked on some home speaker products. He works on hotel cable, like hotel cable. And I feel like every time I talk to him, he's at a burning platform moment. He's like, all right, we're going to do something new, and it's going to be amazing. That's not a really great way to live either. It's not really sustainable. So that when you hear people talk about burning platforms, that's the other extreme behind moonshots. Not everybody does a moonshot. Not everybody does burning platforms. The healthier way to go is with this customer-obsessed incremental growth. And fail fast and carry on, I love that. This idea of human-centered design or really trying to hone in with the users. This is something that seems really natural nowadays. Back, 5, 6, 7 years ago, this wasn't very natural to listen to users, especially in the enterprise space. We think about users as seats, or we think about users as people who just use the product and they don't pay for it, and so it doesn't really matter how they like it. So obviously the example we think about is Amazon. I'm going to see if this is going to automatically play or not. So who's heard of Amazon and Jeff Bezos, customer obsession? So he talks about this concept of it's always day one, and if you lose sight of customer obsession and you start to go into decline. So I want to show really quickly what he talks about. This it's always day one. Have you guys seen this? Have you seen this? I hope this works.
Okay, I think this one is a very important question. What does day 2
Let me see if I can get the captions.
What does day 2 look like? I know the answer to this. Day 2 is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And that is why it is always day 1.
So say what you will about Amazon. People have different opinions on Amazon. They understand what their principles are, and they understand the user. The user is first. The user is above all else. They understand that we have, as long as you keep the user in front of you and you're paying attention, then you're making incremental changes and you're growing all the time, then you will continue to do well and move on. And that's why this new methodology has swept the IT space. Let me grab a drink really quick. And so I want to talk really quickly about how Microsoft changed from on-premises to the cloud, what the situation was for us back then, and then talk a little bit about what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. So when I started taking product school classes, I came and I wanted to get an outside-in perspective, like learn what other folks are doing. And if you read any books about becoming a product manager, they're always about how to get a job as a product manager. I don't know. They're like, how to get a job as a product manager, and then what? So I would like to share with you a little bit of a and then what. And if you have any more questions, as we finish on, I have a resource that I can share with you as well. So I'm going to go back in time to a world before the cloud. This is actually not that long ago. It was like 10 years ago, before like the idea of the cloud even came out. And so we had this new competitive landscape, and Google Docs launched in 2006. This is from TechCrunch. And they're like, they just launched this amazing new product. Go check it out. And they're like, this is another shot across the bow for Microsoft Office. And look at how amazing it was. It was so cool. It looks like Web 2.0. And things got pretty hot over here. 2013, just 7 years later, Microsoft was like the big dog, and now Google's threatening us. They're saying the next decade looks like Google's to lose. Gartner estimates that in 10 years, that's about now, there will be 1.2 billion people using productivity suite services. That's actually was right on. I think about 4 years ago, there were 1 billion people using Office. More than half of them will be using cloud-based productivity suite of some sorts. Gartner's research shows that Google quickly gobbling up the market share in that space, and it could be as high as 50%. If you guys don't know the inner workings of Microsoft's revenue, like a third of it is Office, a third of it is, at the time I think about a third was Office, a third was Windows, and everything else was just kind of peanut butter along the other third. Around the same time, Android is coming on and becoming very popular. And so we weren't I'd say we weren't at necessarily a burning platform moment, but things were heating up. Also, people stopped being nice to us for some reason. I don't know. I don't know if they were ever very nice to us. But we got this really nasty Microsoft's lost decade, where in Vanity Fair, they just came out and they showed our revenue, or our stock growth. They're like, remember that 10 years where your money didn't mean anything? That was great. So we had all these external factors happening, and you can wait until you get to the place of Nokia where they're like, well, we have to sell to Microsoft because we don't have any other choice. Or you can look up and say, we might actually lose this one if we're not careful. And so that's kind of the story of Office 365. So we needed something new. So in 2011, we launched Office 365, and we embraced software as a service. So we went from releasing products every 3 years, which is nuts. Like, imagine, so people would take like 3 months off. They did this thing called the Office Shuffle. That's an exaggeration to say 3 months off, but we'd push really hard to develop products, and then at the end, everyone would change jobs because we were in this waterfall development life cycle. And so, 2007, 2003, we had all the 2010, we would release these, and then everyone would change jobs in Office. And you'd have a new boss, you'd have a new product, and everybody would just move around. It was crazy. I mean, now of course we release on a continuous release cycle. So, and this has marked a really important shift for us, where before we're just trying to sell people a box of software and say, here you go. We'll see you in 3 years. I don't really care if you like it because you own it now, and we'll ship the next one in 3 years. I mean that's a little harsh to say, but essentially, once you've gotten the money for something and you're locked in, you're the big behemoth. There's less incentive to do the right thing for customers. And so as we transitioned over to this continuous release cycle, software as a service, people are paying us $10 a month rather than $300 every 3 years. We started listening a lot closer to what customers were saying, and we needed to do a better job of basically giving value every day to the customers. So that's kind of the landscape under which like where we started. So how did we launch Office 365? How did we change? I'm not gonna go into the nuts and bolts of the big gargantuan Office 365 thing, because there's like 4,000 people who work on it or so or more. But I just want to call out that there's a massive shift, and it can happen in your organization, and sometimes it's a big thing that happens on the outside, and sometimes you're the person who's calling it out. You're the person that's looking at the competitive landscape. I remember being a part of some of these conversations saying, well, what's happening with Google? Like, why, why do users like them better than us? What's happening? And so we actually had a product before this called BPOS. Have you guys ever heard of this? It's basically like Exchange and SharePoint and all that. It's just for businesses, but nobody could use it. And so that was when I first started. I was like, "What? This product is not really usable." And so we launched this product a year after I started Office 365. So what I want to focus on today is a little bit about the journey. That was all preamble, if you couldn't tell. A really long preamble. Like, how do we get here? Organizations change. No matter what kind of organization you're in, there is some type of impetus to change. The burning platform moment can be for your whole company, or it could be for your career. And the same is true for your moonshots. You can be the catalyst for change to maybe not at the same level where you're a multi-billion-dollar company and you're doing something great, but it might be the thing that you say, like, as a company, this is what we should do, or as a department or as a team, this is what we should be building. And you have to choose the kind of narrative that works for the circumstance you're in and the people that you're working with. And how it resonates. That's my segue into getting buy-in. So no one gets to the moon by themselves, and I'm going to go with the positive rather than the negative throughout. I don't want to talk much about burning platforms, and it was hard to find a bunch of pictures of burning platforms, like smaller ones, and there's like one picture of burning platforms. There's a major difference between getting buy-in or getting things done in a small organization versus a large organization. I kind of got a sense of the room, but who's in an organization a company that's larger than 5,000 people? So we got about halvesies. And then who's in an organization that's about 300 or less? About thirdsies. Okay. So if you're, if you're in an organization, so I work at Microsoft in Office. There's 4,000 people just in Office, at least, and the way that we get things done is way different than if you're in a startup. If you're in the startup where I was talking about my friend earlier, he's got 5 different startups. Like how you make decisions, how you get things done is way different. So I want to talk a little bit about that. How do you get buy-in? So on a macro level, what I used to do when I first started with Microsoft, I started before Microsoft. I owned a web development company, so I was a consultant for designing websites and marketing and all of this for people. This is back before WordPress was really easy to use and Wix and all of that. And so we built websites and did UI design. And so I started at Microsoft to help with the UX and also with the writing of the UX and helping it flow between BPOS and Office 365. And one thing that I quickly discovered was that most of the people at Microsoft who were in that area they'd been writing books their whole lives. Imagine a world before the internet. And when we moved to the cloud, we put all the books on the internet, and then they just kept writing books. And that's not how people consume reading on the internet. And they would essentially just be like, here's a book. And everything inside of Microsoft was engineered the same way. You'd write everything for 3 years, and then when they released the product, they'd release the book, and then they'd move on. And so when we moved to the cloud, they're like, okay, we'll just keep writing books over and over again, I guess. And nobody really understood how to listen to the users when writing help documentation or in-app strings or the help experience or the support experience. There was no kind of understanding of that. And so coming from a web development background and coming from the SEO, SEM marketing, I could see this was an issue. If you're talking to a bunch of authors and they're super smart technically, they could put together a server farm that I totally didn't understand, but they didn't understand the benefit and the value of listening, or like how do you pay attention to people who read your content. So we had to build, we actually had to build all of the listening systems that you'd think of for Google Analytics and all of that, because we can't use Google Analytics for our product. It totally doesn't work. And so we had to kind of grow an entirely new muscle for organizations. Like probably there's like 200 writers, 200 people who had worked on the old help systems. And they didn't understand that, like how to write shorter articles. They didn't understand how to get ratings. They didn't understand any of that. So what we did was I brought in normal SEO practices to Microsoft. But wouldn't you know it, people do not like change. They're like, I've been doing it for 30 years this way. We're really good at writing books on the internet. You know, some of these people had been there as long as I'd been alive. They had been, you know, through the .com boom and bust and the Microsoft money. I worked with people who had retired a couple times, and I'm like, why are you back? And so, you know, life's pretty good like that. But our lunch was getting eaten by Google. So what we had to do is convincingly show people that the customers didn't like their work. So we started bringing in data-driven analytics. The way that people used to say it was like, oh, we've got a bunch of views. This is great. We have views. People love views. We're like, we should probably get some feedback on how people like this content. And then so we started getting verbatims, some comments on all. We looked at ratings. We started this entirely new process of collecting all of this, putting it into dashboards, building it up. And over time, people started to say, well, I would like for people to like my articles, and I'd also like to keep my job because now the data matters. And so as you start to bring in the customer's perspective, people become more and more empathetic for a couple reasons. One is they just like it. It's like, oh, I think I could do a better job, but also they don't want to lose their jobs. But if you ever want to try to get buy-in from someone, and whether that's from your colleague who might be writing those articles, or if it's from your boss and your management, you have to get them to agree to the data. That is the number one thing. Has anybody ever been in a meeting and you're trying to convince them of something, and you say, "Oh, here's what's happening," and everybody says, "I don't trust you." I don't trust that data. What is the statistical significance of what you are telling me right now? You're like, well, I don't know. 4? Whenever you're going into a room and you're trying to convince people of something, you have to do two things. You have to have data you can rely on. You have to have customer stories that are believable. You can't have one or the other, and it has to have an emotional connection with. You have to be able to drive an emotional connection with what's happening. Jeff Bezos does, and I'm not like a Jeff Bezos fan, but he talks about like, what do you trust if your data and your verbatims or your qualitative and your quantitative data don't agree, who do you trust? And he says you always trust the qualitative because it turns out it's right. Like you're not making the right choices. Like you're not collecting the right qualitative data in some way. So you have to be able to trust your data at some point. But then if something comes in, you have to have something that checks your data. And this happens on NPR a lot. I don't know if you guys remember, like the one person's the story that really tugs your heart, and you're like, oh, now I'm gonna donate all this money. This is great. And that's the number one way to get people to believe in you. If you have to have data in order to back up the stories, and then you can, when you marry them together, then you actually get things done. And the story that you're telling has to align with whatever the goals of the organization are. So our goal was to, for lack of better terms, beat Google, right? So we started doing these analysis. Before, when we were the biggest gorilla in the room, people just buy our software. It didn't really matter what they thought because there's no competition. And suddenly when Google started coming around, we said, well, what are we going to do? Why are people buying Google? And so we started, of course, like any good company, we would secret shop. We would start doing all these off-campus user research. We would send out surveys. We would just try to figure out what in the heck is going wrong with our products. And maybe it wasn't something that's wrong with our products. We started to figure out that people really liked simple products. They were trying to get me to. It's funny. They sent me a slide deck and they said, "Can you just drop all your slides into Google Slides?" And I was like, "Well, I work at Office. It's kind of we make PowerPoint." And I tried. I did. And all of my slides got messed up. Like they were really close, but my pictures, my animations didn't work. But for most people, they just don't care. Like nobody's making most people, if you're a college student or you're a small business, you're not making really fancy slides. You're not spending all your time on pivot tables. Like you just need something that works in an easy way. And this was an insight that it's pretty obvious, but at the time we were thinking like, as we build new features, as we release new products, we want to be able to say that every 3 years we need to show our work, and so we would just keep cramming more features in, not caring so much if people were using the product, not caring if they were how usable the product was. And so as we started, as you start seeing side-by-side comparisons, and you see it we saw it in the news as well. People were saying like this is simpler and it's easier. That's what users wanted in a sense, and so we started going back to the drawing board and we started making things a lot simpler. And we've improved co-authoring, and we took a lot of learning from Google, from our competitors. So if you're trying to convince somebody of something and you're trying to get them to change how they're doing things, you need to take into consideration what the goal is of the organization, and bring along data, qualitative and quantitative, and that will help drive your point across. So this is Sputnik. This is very metaphorical. Sputnik, if you guys don't know, it's the first satellite, right? Small strategic wins build credibility for further investment. And when you're in a bigger organization, your data is, all your decisions are more highly scrutinized because stakeholders have access to more data. This is an interesting thought. As you as you grow, you can't go by your gut anymore. When you're a startup, when you're small, when nobody cares what you're doing, there's a lot less checks and balances, and this goes in hand with what we were saying before, where you have to be able to validate all of the data that you have. So I work on. So as we started building out this new service, we realized that we needed to have a new support infrastructure. We needed to be able to listen to customers more. And before we had this, we had another way of doing support, and everyone would get through the support funnel. It was really user hostile, I'll just say it that way. Where if somebody wanted to open a support ticket, they would go to the certain area, and then they'd have to make 3 different choices, and they'd have to select all these different things, and it was just a really bad experience. It wasn't built like a web, like a nowadays web kind of thing. Didn't even have a search box. And so we started iterating. We said, what if we just took all that away? And we said, what if we cared more about the users than about saving money? Which this was all about. The way we'd structured this was trying to get people to look at help articles and rather than opening tickets. And we said, what if we just started thinking about the user more than money? Which is crazy if you're in business. You're saying we already spend X amount, tons of money on support. What if we started paying more? And we said, well, we're in a situation where if we don't start caring about the user, then we're not at a burning platform, but things are heating up. And so we started building and iterating, and we started very small with experiments. Who runs A/B tests on their platforms nowadays? Is everybody familiar with A/B testing? It's very common. So when we launched this new experience, we said we're just going to start small and grow, and so we would show month over month we could see an increase in satisfaction for our users, and we it's strange, happier users tend to continue renewing your product. They want to stick around, and we were able to show that happier users pay more, et cetera, and it would offset the costs of these other methods of people opening tickets and us trying to say like, what? Read this help article, read this, blah blah blah. And so as we started to chip away at little pieces throughout throughout Office's infrastructure, people start to notice what you're doing, and then you're saying, well, actually now I want to do this thing, and it's bigger. It's a bigger thing where you're saying, rather than just doing it on my piece of property, I want to do it on your piece of property. And if you have 3,000 people and they all have their own property, people often have a hard time with that. And so they come in and they say, well, what about your data? And how can you prove to me that this is going to be a good experience? And so you continue to build upon that. And as you grow and you start to own more of the user base, then your decisions take on more strategic. They take on more of a strategic importance to the entire company, and you have to be more diligent. And so, how do you keep moving along as you add more people, as you add more growth? So you have to bring people along in a way that makes sense, so that they don't stop you. So that they want to join you. And so you have to project to them, again, whether it's a moonshot or a back to the wall kind of moment, what is the benefit in it for them? And showing, again, as you grow, you have to tell them the same story that you learned with your organization. You have to say that this will also affect their users. So one example was I was in charge of the commercial space for Office 365. So we owned admins, so people who run the servers. And we had this person who, she was in charge of the one website, and we couldn't get her to do something. We were trying to build this product over and over and over again. And every time we were in the meeting with her, she would say, she just wouldn't pay attention. She wouldn't give us any resources. She would just, and eventually we told her, we said, because she didn't care about our users at all. Because she was like a mother hen. She cared about her users, and she didn't care about our users. And we said, as long as this is a bad experience for our users, it affects your users, and I'll show you how. And so we got out the data, and we spliced out and said, the reason why I'm not showing any of the data is because I still work at Microsoft. So I would love to do that, but I'm going to paint you a picture. So we would, we spliced out the data, and we said, here's what it looks like all up. Because admins are much smaller user base, it was hard to really see if they were having problems. And so she would say, like, there were like 10% of the user base of people would come to the website. And so she's like, the metrics look fine. But then we were able to show that if we pulled out the admins and we started showing what the end-to-end experience was for a user that wasn't an admin, we could see that they were also having a poor experience whenever they would encounter the admin-like experience. And so because we were really diligent with gathering the data, we were able to convince other people that their experiences would be better if they were able to come alongside and use the methodology that we had developed. And they become champions after that, where they said, yes, I want to help you. Yes, I want the way that you're doing things to take hold, and I'll even give you resources, and I will tell my boss about what you're doing, so every step along the way becomes more and more. It can become easier because you were diligent up front. Some people like specs. Some people really like to just send out design and be like, oh guys, look at this great idea. Who's ever had the best idea that nobody's ever listened to? Does it ever feel like that? You get into the room and they say, you're like, listen, this is going to solve, yes, you've devised a magic bullet and no one wants to listen to you. It is so, you're like, I've had this idea. When I first started, eventually you start hearing people tell your ideas back to you, and then everybody starts listening to them. You're like, why the heck are they listening to them? And so you start figuring it out. You're like, well, they're telling the story in a way that makes sense to their audience, right? Sometimes you need a new coach, like if you have a championship team and they've kind of gotten the slums, and then like, it seems like the Lakers, they fire the coach all the time, or the Heat, anybody who basically coaches LeBron James gets fired, but the locker room stops listening to you. And so you have to figure out what will they listen to, and you have to be creative. Sometimes it's a video. Have you guys ever created a video for something? Like I went and I made a hackathon, and I worked on a hackathon, and I said, this is something I really believe in. I want my organization to start using it, and it's some secret technology that I can't tell you about, and so we'll just imagine that it's amazing. And so I'd had trouble getting people to listen to what I was saying, and so I went and I spent like 3 days on a video. I got a professional video crew, I mean like cameras, and I had intros and outros and music, and then they're like, it was like a 2.5 minute video, and it was better than any of the hour-long conversations I'd ever had. People were sharing it, and they were like, this is so good. They're like, oh, we want to do this thing. And I was like, I didn't even show hardly anything of like the product I wanted to build. It was all just an idea and a feeling. And people got on board with it. And eventually, if it goes viral and then somebody's boss sees it, and then everybody thinks it's a great idea, and then they're like, oh yeah, the guys who weren't listening to me at all, like I had been pitching them the same idea for weeks, they're all nodding their heads like, oh, yeah, no, totally, we want to do that. That's what and it's just because somebody else really believed in it. So think about how you're telling the story. If you can't get things through to your organization, say like, okay, well, how can I do this differently? Maybe it's a picture book. Maybe it's just telling somebody else to tell people to do things. that works wonders. You're like, I know this other person in the organization can actually change people's minds. I know that they're more valued than I am, and it takes a little bit of humility to do so. We started doing, depending on, I'm not advocating any kind of alcoholism or inclusive, but be friends with people. Like, that's really what, people are humans at work. Be their friends, and then suddenly they'll want to do things for you. Because people tell you no for no reason, and they'll tell you yes for no reason. You kind of have to be nice to people. Like, if you're a jerk, nobody wants to do things for you.